All right, we're going to take a look at the guided reading for section 1.3 about moon phases, eclipses, and tides. The learning target is to explain the relationships between the movements of the Earth, the Moon, and the Sun as they relate to eclipses and lunar phases. So you should have read pages 20 to 27 and completed the guided reading packet, and now you'll go through the packet and make any corrections. Also remember to add to that class wiki. Let's get started. Now we skipped the target reading skills. So number one, circle the letter of each sentence that is true about the motions of the moon. So B, C, and D. B, the same side of the moon always faces the Earth. The moon rotates slowly on its axis once every 27.3 days, and a day and a year on the moon are the same length. So in other words, a day, the rotation of the moon and the revolution of the moon around the Earth are the same length. 2. What causes the phases of the moon, eclipses, and tides? These are all caused by the changing relative positions of the moon, the Earth, and the Sun. 3. The different phases, different shapes of the moon you see from Earth are called phases. Now it's important that you're just seeing different shapes. The moon doesn't suddenly become a crescent. You're just seeing that little corner of the moon being lit by the sun. So it's the apparent shapes of the moon are the phases. How often does the moon go through an entire set of phases? It goes through the whole set of phases about once every 29.5 days. So it's about a month for the moon to go through its cycle. And that's where the term month comes from. It kind of sounds like moon, doesn't it? All right, let's get to the next one. Question 5. What does the phase of the moon you see depend on? It depends on how much of the sunlit side of the moon faces the Earth. So depending on the location of the moon around the Earth and its revolution, we're only seeing part of what's lit. Here's the phases of the moon. The new moon is when the side of the moon facing the Earth is dark. A first quarter moon is when the half of the side of the moon facing Earth is lighted. So half of a half of the side, half of the half, it's like a quarter of the moon. So it's a first quarter. Full moon, all of the side of the moon facing the Earth is lighted. So half of the moon is lit, it looks like a full moon. And half of the side of the moon facing the Earth is lighted. That's a third quarter. So again, half of the side, so that's half of a half. That's a quarter moon. We call first quarter moons waxing because they're getting bigger, and third quarter moons are waning because they're getting smaller each night. D, is the near side facing Earth always the dark side? Use the table to explain your answer. The near side is not always the dark side. The near side is the dark side during a new moon, but the far side is the dark side during a full moon. And E, what percentage of the dark side of the moon do you see during first and third quarter moons? You see about half. So I guess this is referring to when you look up, you can see half, you see the first quarter lit by the sun, but you can still see a dark part of the moon. It's just a little bit harder to see. So you see about half of the dark side, so that's like half of a half again. All right. Up next, question 7. When the moon's shadow hits Earth, or Earth's shadow hits the moon, what occurs? An eclipse occurs. So there's solar eclipses and lunar eclipses. We had a really cool lunar eclipse a couple months ago. The darkest part of the moon's shadow is called the umbra. What causes a solar eclipse? The moon passes directly between the Earth and the sun, blocking sunlight from reaching the Earth. So it happened during the day, and a solar eclipse would happen during a new moon, and the moon passes in front of the sun and it blocks out the sun in a small area of the Earth. The larger part of a shadow, less dark than the umbra, is called the penumbra. 12, circle the letter of each sentence that's true about solar eclipses. During a partial solar eclipse, part of the sun remains visible. And during a total solar eclipse, the sky grows dark. 13. What is the arrangement of Earth, Moon, and Sun during a lunar eclipse? The Earth is directly between the moon and the sun. So the lunar eclipse will happen during a full moon, and the Earth passes between the sun and the moon, and it darkens the moon temporarily. 14. Circle the letter of each sentence that's true about lunar eclipses. A. A lunar eclipse always occurs at a full moon. That's true. During a lunar eclipse, Earth blocks sunlight from reaching the moon. And D. A partial lunar eclipse occurs when the moon passes partly into the umbra of Earth's shadow. All right, let's take a look at the last couple questions here. I think this is it, yep. The rise and fall of ocean water is called tides. What force pulls the moon and the Earth toward each other? That's gravity. We learned about gravity in the last section. Why do tides occur? Tides occur mainly because of differences in how much the moon's gravity pulls on different parts of the Earth. So the moon could be pulling on the water, or it could actually be pulling the Earth itself, and that causes the water around the Earth to kind of seem higher or lower, kind of bubbles. No, I don't want to say bubbles up. We'll have to draw pictures to get a good idea for tides. 18. Circle the letter of each sentence that's true about tides. A, the point on Earth that is closest to the moon has a tide, and D, the point on Earth that's farthest from the moon has a high tide. Spring tide is a tide with the greatest difference between consecutive low tides and high tides. So there's a really big difference between the high and low tides on that day. And a neap tide is a tide with the least difference between consecutive highs and consecutive lows. So a neap tide is, there's not much difference between the high and low tide for a day. Spring tide, big difference. Illustration below draws the possible locations of the moon at spring tide and neap tide. So spring tide, the moon could be here and as a new moon, or over here as a full moon. And you can kind of see from the picture that the moon and the sun in this location are both pulling on the water there. Oh, I'm sorry, they're both pulling on the Earth there and the water, so that makes the water go up. But also there's water over here that's getting left behind, so to speak. Or during a full moon, this water is getting pulled this way, and this water is getting pulled that way by the sun. Neap tide, it's at like a right angle. The moon and the sun and the Earth form a right angle. So the water is sort of getting pulled that way, but sort of getting pulled that way, and so there's not a big difference. In 22, letter of each of the phases when it's possible for a spring tide, a new moon, or a full moon. So make any corrections you need to, add anything to the class wiki, and we'll get going on level 2 later on.